How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Fire Emblem 3 Houses Blue Lions Maddening Mode, a low turn crown playthrough. My name is Mekkah, and I'm not playing, I'm commentating the Hilda Cyril Paralogue, as well as the Rhea Paralogue. This Paralogue is available both pre-time skip and post-time skip. We choose to do it now though, because we had no need for its rewards earlier. And in 3 Houses, Paralogue enemies don't scale according to when you clear them, unlike in Fates and Awakening when they get stronger if you play them later in the game. And that's convenient for us, because even though we have unlocked advanced and even in some cases master classes on our units, we actually get to face intermediate enemies for the most part. And that makes routing the chapter a lot more easy and a lot more reliable. Our combat is generally not a big problem in this chapter, at least the hand-to-hand combat. There are some enemies that are tough to one round. For example, this Cavalier that Gilbert fights, you managed to miss a 93 hit against him, but thankfully Annette ends up clutching it with an Adjutant follow-up. Those are pretty rare, but it's pretty funny to see when it happens, especially when it makes a difference.
What's my strategy?
Actual enemies that are hard to kill include these giant birds, like the one Dimitri is working on. They have 2 health bars, so unless you get dancers involved, or you do like a player phase plus enemy phase attack, they will not die in 1 turn. But other than that, it's just a matter of spreading our units out and making the most of our player plus enemy phases to route them at least 2 turns, because 1 turn is impossible. Now we have some strange weapon choices on some of our units. Felix is using a magic bow, and his magic's obviously terrible, but so is the resistance on the enemy wyvern riders, so that's why that works out despite the weirdness of it. Sylvain is memeing around with a devil axe. He takes a 10 damage penalty like a champ. It's kind of weird that he still doubles with it, but that's how weak the enemies are. He's using it to weigh himself down and make it easier for the enemies to chip down the Kingdom Lion Core that he has equipped. That battalion has a massive 120 durability, so it takes quite a while to get it down there, but it's almost there. Gilbert wants to avoid a miss against this archer, so he would like to use a combat art, but he doesn't have the 1 kill threshold, so he has to double instead and hope he doesn't screw it up again. Bernadetta and Dimitri do a bit of trade management with the knowledge gem. Of course, Dimitri wants to use it to train his axe rank, so he can finally certify for Wyvern Lord, because he's had the level for it now. But Bernie wants to have the knowledge gem to master the dancer class, so they have a bit of a conflict of interest there. Dimitri is actually equipped with both axe and bow prowess for this chapter, and he's using these weapons whenever they are, important. Bows are of course nice for one to range, but axes are nice for training his axe rank when he can. And he also doesn't always want to have the knowledge gem, he also wants to have the critical ring to maximize his crit rate on enemy phase. Byleth chips down the flying battalion that she has, using a bow against an archer, something you've seen in the previous chapter as well. And from there, it's enemy phase time. And this enemy phase looks more like a FE7 enemy phase than a 3 Houses enemy phase, considering how many enemies end up dying, like right here. But there are some tricky things and important tidbits to highlight. Dimitri has a flying Marianne as his adjutant. There are support partners for Dimitri that would boost his attack, but unfortunately none of those are available. Byleth is one of them, but she's used for combat here. And the other one would be to do, but he is just not there. So we just give him Marianne to boost at least his hit and avoid, but not his attack. And that we've already covered. And then we have Flame on Seteth to increase his attack power and also his hit and avoid. Leonie gets some enemy phase chip with the Horse Slayer Plus. Her attack and defense are nerfed a little bit because of the Dance of the Goddess battalion that she has, which has negative properties in those stats, but she manages to survive nonetheless, thankfully. This chapter also features some green units that you have to protect. If all of them die, you actually get a game over, which can be a source of both hilarity and frustration. I find these green units pretty helpful sometimes, as they can actually gambit some of the enemies, but they can also be distractions that make it harder to route, like when an enemy goes for a green unit, or a green unit gets in the way of like a point where you want to attack. But it is kind of nice for them to chip down enemies, and in fact, we can make use of this later on turn 2. Now, as is tradition in this chapter, we have used our forced units in the Paralogue as stride bots, and we usually do this with units that we haven't really used. Think of units like Ash and Catherine in that Paralogue. Ash was the one using a torch, and Catherine was the one using stride on turn 1. In this chapter, we've been using Hilda and Cyril for the same purpose, but Hilda is someone we've actually been using. But we've mostly have had her use stride with a knowledge gem in the 2 chapters. And the reason for that is she's working on mastering Archer, and you might actually see more of Hilda later on. Similarly, Cyril isn't really a unit that we've used. He's been on the bench most of the time, but Cyril does have really good boons that make it very easy for him to qualify for a good class like Wyvern Rider or Cavalier. In our case, he's a Cavalier just because that gives him Canto after he uses Stride. But he's also learned Point Blank Volley, which is going to come in handy in a minute. Linhardt is trading an Archer Battalion with Fusillade by using Warp. And we used him to warp Hilda closer to the action so she can get some combat in it at least. Leone used Break Shot on this Cavalier to nerf his defense a little bit, and then Hilda takes him out using Tempest Lance with a Training Lance for maximized accuracy. Just another example of LTCs trying to maximize reliability over almost everything else. I can imagine you might be curious how the hell Gilbert is doubling enemies of all people, considering his reputation of being super slow. One reason for that is once you get Gilbert out of his Fortress Knight class and into a higher class with a higher base speed like Wyvern, his speed increases tremendously because it gets rid of his basically negative base that way, thanks to class bases. We also cooked speed +3, which is also helpful. Cyril gets a pretty funny point-blank volley hit on a very, very weakened and nerfed Archer. And then finally, we have Seth kill. I mean, you could call him the boss because the boss music plays, but it's not a very exciting battle. He gets the boss kill there for some EXP, I guess. And from there, turn 2 is just a very easy cleanup. We lock down 2 enemies in the corner where Sylvain and Seth are, using the massive range of the wave attack gambit that's on the Kingdom of Lioncourt. I think most people keep that on Dimitri, mostly for story reasons. But it works pretty well for locking enemies down. Anyway, that is the Hilda Cyril Paralogue completed in 2 turns. Let's move on to the Rhea one. The Rhea Paralogue uses the same map as Chapter 11. That was the one where we fought the Flame Emperor. In that one, he started at the bottom and we were at the top and we had to work our way down. And this chapter is the reverse. We start on some sort of a podium-like thing at the bottom and we have to work our way up for the most part. This can be a little difficult for units that are not flying because they would run into a ledge that they cannot traverse. Seemingly they're afraid of jumping down for some reason, unlike a Radiant Dawn. But thankfully we have a lot of flyers as well as warpers to work our way around that problem. Now our warpers here use not their maximum range but almost like the minimum every time they're warping someone. This is to show that even in a playthrough where your units get magic screwed for some reason, or you're doing like a 0% growth playthrough, you can still warp units with enough range to where they have enough mobility to reach the objective of this map. And the objective of this map is to kill all 4 of the commanders. It usually results in a more interesting gameplay than chapters where you just have to kill one boss or even where you have to route. But in this case, it's not really all that well thought out. 3 of the 4 bosses that we have to kill start at the top of the map and are just kind of hunched together. And the 4th one is in the center and pretty clearly in range of our units of turn 1, even if we didn't have as much mobility as we do. As a result, most of the actions that we do in this chapter are not towards the main objective, but are just self-improvement. And that's kind of sad, you know, you wish chapters were designed a little better. The first time I got this chapter was in my Blue Lions Hard Mode New Game Plus playthrough. And other than that, I missed it on my first playthrough, and I also missed it on my Ballad solo, because this chapter is pretty tricky to unlock if you don't know how. It's a little secretive. You have to have a C support with Rhea, and you have to do that before the time skip, because she's not present in the post-time skip. And that's pretty weird to do. You have to give Rhea like a bunch of items or do a bunch of faculty training with her. And the other thing about it is that it has a deadline, and if you miss a deadline for example, her C support, you can never get more supports and you can never get this paralogue again. And for that reason, I think I got a bunch of comments on that episode saying like, hey, I never got this paralogue, how did you do that? And I had no idea how, I just kind of randomly got it on my second playthrough. Sylvain is going to kill this random bishop here, but he actually gets wrecked by Miracle, and as a result he dies and we have to Divine Pulse. Thankfully, we have a spare action with Aloe to burn some numbers. Thanks to rally resistance from Manette, he manages to survive a double Banshee hit. You'll notice he took 0 damage from something in that round of combat. That was the Aegis Shield that gave him a 10 damage penalty because he doesn't have a crest, but you cannot die to these, so that's why he survived in the end. Without rally resistance or the Aegis Shield, both he would have died. Now, at the top, we have the 3 bosses. 2 of them are on a horse, so they're pretty easy to kill with, for example, the Spear of us all, or in our case, what we do here is we use Byleth to just use really high attack with the Silver Axe and our high base strength to kill that guy. And other than that, it's just a matter of self-improvement. One last thing to note that might be interesting is that Felix is an adjutant, and he's using lances instead of axes. And the reason for that is the Wyvern Lord certification. You need A axes, A flying, and C lances for that one. And you are allowed to be 1 rank below the requirements for the certification. We're not going for 100%, but if we're going to miss a requirement, we'd rather it be one of the higher ones, since they take longer to build. And so in this chapter, we managed to get Felix the C lances to increase his chance of certification, and now he never needs to use lances again. Anyway, that is the Rhea Paralogue completed in 1 turn. I will see you next time.
Maybe it seems all here.